Hello everybody and welcome to our webinar, He Just Won't Listen, Child and Brain Development 101. If you're joining us today, chances are you're having a challenge with a particular child, and this is a really great webinar for understanding the basics of how children act, how their brains work, why they do the things they do. And hopefully at the end you'll have a better picture of what your child's like, what's normal, and from there we can go and talk about specific issues and problems. So my name is Judy Arnall. I am a certified Canadian family life educator, and I just recently became certified in the Brain Story course. I am a bit of an idealist in that I read research, I read recommendations from a whole body of organizations, but I'm also a realist. I have 5 children of my own. They range in age from 15 to 25, and I have 4 sons and a princess in the middle. And throughout all that parenting, we've had our challenges, but it's really good to know you're a lot more relaxed with the 5th child because you know exactly what the 4 other kids have done at particular ages, and you really get to know, you know what, it's all just a stage. It really is. I've written 2 books. One is Parenting with Patience, and that's for parents to help them understand stress. So there's a lot of stress in parenting, and parents can handle their stress, and also how to help our children handle their stress and anger. So it's helping parents get a grip and helping kids get a grip. And then I wrote a book on discipline, absolutely non-punitive discipline. So lots of tools to solve every problem from babies to teens without using any kinds of punishment. I also teach 2 parenting courses. The first one is Parent Effectiveness Training, and that runs annually, twice a year, at the University of Calgary Continuing Education. And the other one is created by Alberta Health Services called Terrific Toddlers, and that tends to run as a webinar series. So if you're interested in that, go to the website professionalparenting.ca and see if you can sign up at those different times for physical courses or online courses. Okay, now I think parenting is one of the hardest jobs in the world, if not the hardest. It is a total exercise in executive function skills for parents. I put this tip jar on my table to see if I get a tip to go on a holiday, and I got some quarters and dimes, and it was really cute, little chocolate bars. And then I put a wife's tip jar in the laundry room. And you know how in coffee shops they put money in to set the precedence. So I put a $50 bill in there, and I haven't got anything back. So that's it. Laundry's piling up in my house. So the information for this course comes from, mostly from the Brain Core Story. Some tips from Parenting with Patience, Discipline Without Distress, Positive Discipline, from the Terrific Toddlers course and the PET course. Okay, so first section. Solid brain architecture is built over time. Unlike hearts and lungs, babies come into the world with a brain that is not fully developed at birth. So actually it takes about 25 years to be almost fully developed. That's a long time for a single organ. So I'm going to play a little video here on explains brain architecture. Let me just find that one. There we go. Sorry. Oh, there we go. Okay. That sound would help.
Modern science now tells us a great deal about how brains are built in childhood. Did you know that early childhood experiences actually change our brains in ways that affect our health throughout our lives?
We have a very kind of rich and rapidly growing science about early childhood development, and particularly how early experiences affect long-term outcomes in learning as well as physical and mental health. And we also have a huge amount of new research that is helping us understand how adversity early in life, and particularly the toxic stress that young children can experience, gets into the body and actually affects the developing architecture of the brain.
So experiences we have in our earliest years affect how our brains get built. That's important because the basic structures we develop as infants lay the foundation for more complex structures that develop as we grow. Just as a house needs a sturdy foundation to support the walls and roof, a brain needs a good base to support all future development. Positive interactions between young children and their caregivers literally build the architecture of the developing brain to provide a sturdy base for a lifetime of better health. On the other hand, if a child experiences a pileup of negative experiences, such as abuse or neglect, and if no caregiver is there to provide support, a sturdy brain foundation may never develop. That can lead to lifelong learning difficulties and health problems, including addiction and mental illness.
It affects the cardiovascular system, it affects the immune system. And so what this science is telling us is that we ignore the early years at our peril.
It's amazing to think that the experiences we have in our earliest years can affect our health for a lifetime. Since strong societies are made up of healthy individuals, it's up to us as a community to make sure all kids have the kinds of nurturing experiences they need to build healthy brains and bodies.
Okay, so what that means is brains are certainly buildable from an early age. So good parenting is what providing scaffolding. And scaffolding is that ability to shape and structure the brain with the aid of an adult or a parent or caregiver or grandparent so that the child can have the ability to carry on and do it on themselves as they get older. So that's what good parenting is. When babies are born, they're born with about 100 billion brain cells. And for the most part, a lot of these cells aren't connected at birth. They're connected after birth in relation to their experience. So let's look at the brain. These are the 4 quadrants of the brain, and they all have a distinct job to do. It's what we call the cerebral cortex. So the temporal lobe is one of the ones, that's the mid part of the brain, and babies start developing their brain usually from the brain stem up to the temporal lobe. So hearing and language is something that is very sensitive to growing in even before birth. So babies in utero hear their parents, they hear language, and a week after they're born, they respond. They can distinguish their mom's voice from a room. Maybe not see mom across the room, but they hear the voice. And that's the beginning of language development. And then the next lobe is the vision. By 3 months, a baby can see pretty well all across the room, just as an adult can see. And then the toddler preschooler years, more of the parietal lobe is developing, that sense of taste, smell, and touch. And then the preschool school age years is more the top of the brain. And then as we move to adolescence, it's more the frontal lobes and the reasoning. So the building blocks of brains are the neurons, which we call the brain cells. And they're responsible for all the functioning of a brain. So this neuron, it has 2 main parts. It has an axon and it has dendrites, right? So what a neuron does is in response to experiences, it fires at a nearby brain cell. So this little dendrite here, let's go to the bottom here. This is an enlargement of this dendrite reaching out to this axon in another cell. So here's your axon, here's your dendrite, and there's a gap here. They don't quite touch. And what happens is when a baby experiences, say his mom sings to him, he's sending neurotransmitters across this gap. And what it does is it forms a pathway. And pathways are really good. They strengthen the brain. Now this is elementary. So these are the axons. These are the little dendrites. They're reaching out and touching this one. And here's a pathway being formed in response to an experience. So the gap here is called a synapse. And the synapse is where the neurotransmitter forms a pathway across. So let's say a child's going to pick up an object. First, the frontal lobe kicks into action and makes that decision to pick up the object. And then the parietal lobe kicks in and says, okay, best way to do this is plan for the hand to reach the object. And we need to call in the vision system. And then the cerebellum says, okay, let's coordinate those muscles and let's reach it towards the object. And the signals are sent down the spinal cord and to the arm to pick up an object. So the brain is the 3-pound computer making all the coding, the software, the loading of the instructions for the body to act out. And that's what is so important for brain development. So brain development is what we call a wiring process. The neurons form connections with each other or pathways to create these pathways. And they're responsible for all major brain processes. So how do we wire the brain? How do we help the brain make all those pathways to fire it up? Well, that's good. Neurons multiply, so babies are born with 100 billion, and they have trillions by the time they reach their teens. And the neurons move into positions. They grow dendrites, they grow axons, they form those connections, and myelination is the last part where it's thickening of that coating over the brain cells. So here's a quick little quiz. At birth, the brain is fully developed, just like one's heart or stomach. True or false? The brain's development depends entirely on the genes you're born with. True or false? A toddler's brain is less active than the brain of a college student. True or false? Reading to a toddler is not important because they can't read the words. True or false? Children need special help and specific educational toys to develop their brain power. True or false? So if you've said false to all these questions, you're correct. So like I said, the brain is not fully developed. It develops after birth in response to experiences. We're going to talk about genes. Genes are half the story, but again, that interplay between genes and experiences, which we call epigenetics, is responsible for a lot of what children do. Toddler's brain is much more active than the brain of a college student because they're making a lot of pathways and connections. And by college, a brain has pruned those things that aren't used yet. If you don't use it, you lose it. Reading is important to a toddler because they're hearing language, and even though they can't speak, they're hearing sounds, and that's very important. Like I said, that language part of the brain is one of the first to develop. And children don't need special toys. Special toys are an adult construct. Children need, as we all watch kids who sit on the floor and play with a cardboard box, they just need stimulation, and it can be any kind of stimulation. So genes, nature or nurture, what matters more? That's a long-term question that everybody says, okay, what's better? Is it your experiences or is it what you were born with, your genes? And it's an interplay. So building brains is good. You want to build a good foundation during pregnancy, So eating healthy, abstaining from alcohol and drugs, getting sleep, low stress, those things are great. Those are all you can do to have a healthy pregnancy. And then when your baby's born, you build the walls, which you add the warmth and the nurturing. Now, genes are those hereditary things we have that could be expressed or could lie dormant. So if you look at a house and the little red blocks are the genes, they're there, but whether they're turned on or not depends on a whole bunch of things. And science still doesn't know which turns on some genes and which doesn't. But we do know they lie there, they're embedded, and whether they're expressed or not depends on certain factors. So here's the brain at birth. See the neurons? And there's a brain at 6 years old. And look at all those wonderful pathways. That's great. But the brain needs to operate efficiently. And just like a tree needs pruning, so does a brain. So the brain prunes those pathways that aren't used. So for example, if your child is learning French in grade 6, they have all these French pathways. And then by the time they're 15, if they decided French isn't for them, they could have pruned those French pathways because they're not using them anymore. It doesn't mean they can't go back to them later on because those pathways have been formed, but it just means that as they may lose their French language if they don't keep it up and practice it. Okay, so that's brain architecture, the basic ways brains are built. Let's talk about serve and return, wiring the house. Okay, back to our videos. What is serve and return? What do we mean by that? It's the interplay between caregiver and child talking to each other.
We're now learning about the many ways in which solid brain foundations are built and maintained in a developing child. One important way is through what brain experts call serve and return interactions. Imagine a tennis match between a caregiver and a child. But instead of hitting a ball back and forth across the net, various forms of communication pass between the two. From eye contact to touch, from singing to simple games like peekaboo.
The child serves or indicates they're interested in something. The adult who's attentive to that child returns that interest, and that ramps up the child's enthusiasm, and they do the activity again. So when they're learning to read, the child shows an interest in a book. The adult sees that and reads to them. The child gets all excited and tries reading back, and then the child's using those circuits that underlie reading over and over again, driven by the enthusiasm of the interaction with the attentive adult.
The response and attention a child receives from an adult when they are practicing certain social, emotional, and physical skills goes a long way to sparking that child's own excitement with learning and repeating certain actions.
The child gets positive feedback from the adult, and they try harder, so they're using that circuit again and again. That circuit will really be sturdy and will form a sturdy architecture for later life function.
In order to build these sturdy circuits in a developing brain, it's crucial for caregivers to actively engage with the child. Prolonged passive activities, such as leaving the child alone in front of a television, or merely holding the child without eye contact, will not build solid brain architecture.
Without serve and return attentive adult interactions, the child's much less likely to undertake a lot of these activities, and their brain won't develop as well.
Serve and return interactions, repeated throughout a young person's developing years, are the bricks that build a healthy foundation for all future development.
So that's what we mean by serve and return. So it's those back and forth interactions. So I will throw out a question there. What's a child's best toy? Is it an iPad, a parrot, a stuffed animal? Now you can see these aren't color-coded. They're designed to throw you off. But if you said parent, you are right. So a few studies have gone across Canada, namely this one, the EC Mapping Project, and it's shown that in every neighborhood across Alberta, 1 in 4 children are at risk for improper language development and social and emotional competencies. So what that means is they're not ready for grade 1 in terms of their language development, and language is all important for expressing their feelings, asserting themselves rather than using their words instead of pushing another child. And they get that language competence by, guess what? Parents talking to them. Absolutely. Now again, remember I said even before birth, that window for language development is opening up. So like about 6 months into the pregnancy to definitely around that first year and all the way to age 6 is when children's sensitive periods for language is. That's the time we need to have serve and return interactions with our child. We need to pay attention to them. We need to sing to them, read to them, talk to them, notice them. We need to pay attention to them. It's said now we're raising the silent generation because we use screens as babysitters. And what's happening is children are not learning facial cues, voice intonation, or conversation skills. And they really need those for social, emotional relationships. So serve and return is just a nurturing and attentive response. Talking to adults and interplaying with adults. Talking, reading, singing, responding. Very important. Okay, let's look at toxic stress and ACEs. ACEs is an acronym for Adverse Childhood Experiences. These are things that happen to children that affect their long-term health and well-being. I'm not going to play that one. So there are 3 types of stress. There's what we call positive stress. It's very motivational and it builds resiliency. So for example, if a child is going to a birthday party and it's the first one that's unparented, that can be a source of positive stress. They worry about it, they're anxious about it, but after they've gone, they did it, the parent comes and picks them up, first time they're left alone, it's like, yay, I did it. It's motivational and it builds self-esteem and competencies. Now, tolerable stress is not so nice. I actually use balls to show this in classes. So this is a very spongy, bouncy ball. A golf ball is an example of a tolerable stress. So it hits hard, it's bouncy, it's not positive stress, it's not nice stress, but it subsides and it's buffered by caring people. When it's not buffered by caring people, it moves into toxic stress. Toxic stress can be ongoing, prolonged, unpredictable, and not buffered by caring people. Toxic stress is like being hit with a rock. It hits hard, hits the floor very, very hard. And toxic stress is where damage to brain cells occurs. Cortisol is released. Adrenaline is released in response to toxic stress. And cortisol and adrenaline by itself is okay. It's like the acceleration pedal in a car. You need it to pass that stressful other car. But then you need to let off and go back to a normal speed. If you leave your car on the gas pedal all the time, it really stresses the engine and the inner workings of the car. And same with toxic stress. It cannot be ongoing. So adverse childhood experiences are those things that happen to children in their childhood. There are 10 of them. About 70% of the population grow up with one. And by itself, it's okay, because usually there's some protective factors there, such as a caring adult. 15% of the population grow up with 3 or more, and that increases their risk for lifelong health problems, hypertension, diabetes, overweight, heart disease, and mental illness, a whole range of problems. So what are the 10 ACEs? They're emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, watching a parent being abused, non-attachment or unrelentless criticism from a parent or caregiver, witnessing untreated mental illness and the effects of that, witnessing a parent with addiction, parent absence such as jail, parent absence just as neglect, not being there, and separation or divorce, a parent not there. Now, like I said, 70% of people grow up with one, and they're pretty well fine because they do have a caring adult. But when 3 or more are interplayed, then it becomes a risk factor for compromising future mental health. So if you look at the stack here, 1 or 2, maybe not so lifelong effects. Those things can be mitigated. But when you add 6, 7, 8, those things are very, very hard to come back from. So in my classes, I try and teach parents, well, which one would fall into toxic stress? Which one would fall into tolerable? Which one would fall into positive? And it depends. If it's motivational, it goes into positive. If it's buffered by a caring adult and it subsides, it goes into tolerable. If it's not buffered by a caring adult and it's ongoing, it goes into toxic. So keep in mind, adult support changes toxic to tolerable. So even if, as you can see in the film coming out, if one parent dies, if the support of another parent is there, meets the child's needs, it can mitigate. It's a coping mechanism for helping that child through, and it changes that stress from toxic to tolerable. Okay, let's look at that one.
Research has proven that positive experiences in our earliest years actually help build brain architecture. So does that mean negative experiences can weaken brain architecture? The answer is yes, and the culprit is certain kinds of stress. The body and brain respond to stress by raising the heartbeat, pumping out adrenaline, and sending out stress hormones like cortisol, preparing us to act in a crisis. One kind of stress, called positive stress, is beneficial. It's normal and healthy for children to face challenges like meeting new people or attending the first day of school. The stress responses triggered by these events are usually short and not too severe. This kind of stress is positive because it prepares the brain and body for stressful situations later in life.
There are kind of these multiple phases of stress. So we have kind of what we call good stress, which is this kind of controllable stress in our lives, things like studying for a test, solving a problem. At the time we may not like them, but the reality of it is that we grow from them, we develop adaptive coping skills, and they kind of benefit us in the long run.
Children surrounded by caring adults experience positive stress in ways that benefit and strengthen their brain architecture. It's how we prepare our brains and bodies for other stressful events that we will experience throughout life. Sometimes children face more serious events. Think of a bad accident or a tragedy like a death in the family or a natural disaster. These events can cause a more severe stress response with the potential to last a long time and come back often. Support from caregivers can buffer the severity of the stress response and help keep stress levels under control. If the stress is kept in check, it won't do lasting damage to the child's brain and body. That's called tolerable stress.
And so this is things that are bad, but they're the kind of things we can't avoid, like the death of our parents or moving away from home, things that everyone goes through. And they're not positive. They're kind of negative in value, but they're the kind of things that everyone goes through. We can all kind of support each other, and they're made a lot easier by support networks and, coping skills and stuff like that.
The attention and support of caregivers prevents tolerable stress from causing lasting harm to developing brains. A third kind of stress is called toxic stress. It occurs during repeated exposure to bad situations like abuse, neglect, or serious hardship. If no supportive adults are around to help buffer the stress response, the hormone levels stay dangerously high. Severe stress is especially toxic if it occurs often and lingers for a long time. That can have a negative impact on brain architecture and on other systems in the body. Toxic stress can cause serious health problems later in life.
These are things that are like pervasive, typically very uncontrollable and unpredictable, abusive relationships, poverty, loss of job, loss of social status, things like this, which are kind of beyond our control and are very pervasive in our life and really kind of have this detrimental effect on us.
Toxic stress can weaken developing brain architecture and damage other body systems in young children. The effects can be a lifetime of health challenges, including physical and mental health problems and even addiction. To ensure a healthier future for our families and communities, we need to work together to support caregivers and children, prevent toxic stress, and provide the kinds of nurturing experiences that build healthy brains and bodies.
Okay, so that is toxic stress. Now, let's go on to executive function, the development of air traffic control. So here's a question. When does the brain begin developing? So if you said 1 month pregnancy, yes, you are right. And when does it end? Not complete until age 25. So by the time a child is 6 years old, their brain is 90% of the size of adults. The gray and white matter undergo changes throughout adolescence though. And in teen years, the amygdala is the gas pedal and the prefrontal cortex is the brakes. So that continues until they're about equal at age 25. Now, here's a question for you. What's the difference between a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old? Well, in looking at this, a lot of difference in brain capacity and structure. So a 3-year-old has very little self-control, very little ability to focus, plan, or memory. And that's what we call executive function. So there are 4 components of that. By age 5, as you can see, this big trajectory up here, it takes a huge leap. So by age 5, 6, children have a much more developed function of executive function. So for a 3-year-old not to listen, pretty normal. For a 6-year-old not to listen, not so much like a 3-year-old. So definitely can listen a bit better. And that's why children don't start formal, compulsive school until age 6, because they're up here in terms of listening. And when we tell them to do something, they might do it. So under age 5, if we tell a child to do something, about 40% of the time they'll do it. 60% of the time they will not listen to us. And that's normal development. That is not a discipline issue. That's a development issue. So let's look at the 4 components of executive function. So the first one is working memory. So that's the ability to hold 2 instructions in their head at the same time. Now, if you look at children playing a chess game, we can go through this. So for 2 instructions, say this child is thinking, okay, I got to remember that the queen can move any which way, but the horse can only move in an L-shaped. So they have to have that ability to remember that. 3-year-olds cannot play chess unless they're very, very, very advanced. Next one is focus. Can they filter distractions? Can they not focus on the bird that's flying by the window and keep their minds on the game? 5-year-olds, baby. Self-control, that ability to take turns. And especially the ability not to wreck the board when you lose. How many children do we know? I didn't see that in my household till about age 8 or 9. We had to pack away the board games because they just couldn't self-control their loss. And the last one is planning. So the ability to have an alternate plan in mind, what we call plan B. So in relation to chess, if this little boy just moves his players so it wrecks your next plan move, it's that ability to figure out what you're going to do next in relation to what he's just done. That takes planning. And again, like I said, look at that line from 0 to 3, not a whole lot of self-control, not a whole lot of focus, planning, or working memory. Big leap to age 6. Big, 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 big. And then growing a bit through the school age years, and then you notice again, the next big leap is from age 13 to age 25, where it maxes out. Again, so the teen years are another huge stage, not so much dramatic as 3 to 5, but still growing in those years where the prefrontal cortex, the master holder of executive function, is really kicking into play. And then our brain is going downhill. So self-control. A lot of adults have difficulty with executive function too. I like to use this test for adults if I ask an adult to read out the color of the word. So they're pretty good here. Red, blue, orange, purple. Orange, blue, green, red, purple. They have to stop and think and consciously think. So that's a really good test of focusing, adult self-control, and executive function skills. Some great games for children to develop their executive function are games like Bingo, Simon Says, just waiting, ability to wait, red light, green light, freeze tag, all those are really good examples of executive function. Okay, let's look at the video here.
Ever wonder why some children are well organized and have an easier time adapting to change than others? It's a result of how certain skills develop in our brains at a young age. Scientists call these skills executive function and self-regulation, which can be thought of like air traffic control in the child's mental airspace. Think of a young child's brain as the control tower at a busy airport. All those planes landing and taking off, and all of the support systems on the ground simultaneously demand the controller's attention to avoid a crash. It's the same with a young child learning to pay attention, plan ahead, cope with frustration, and follow lots of rules.
When executive functioning skills are working well, they're invisible. It's not like you see them in action because they enable children to be a good student, to be a good friend, to learn well. So they're just kind of hidden. It's really when they break down or when a child is really challenged by these capacities, hasn't had a chance to develop them very well, that you see problems.
Kids with well-developed executive function can deal with day-to-day worries, temptations, and obligations that pile up in their minds. They have the skills to regulate the flow of information and prioritize tasks. Executive function is one of the ways we manage stress and maintain an even keel, even as demands on our attention start to pile up. Kids who haven't developed strong executive function have a harder time directing mental traffic. Without the ability to prioritize, thoughts pile up and collisions occur, leading to frustration and anxiety.
First of all, we aren't born with executive functioning skills. Executive functioning skills are capacities that we learn. It's very important that children be in relatively predictable, unchaotic environments that are free of toxic stress, because when we are surrounded by chaos and disorganization, and especially if we're surrounded by fear and anxiety and a world that feels threatening, it's very hard for children to acquire these kinds of capacities.
Like most skills, good executive function depends on a strong brain foundation that develops in our earliest years of life. Caregivers can help by setting a good example with their own behavior, practicing serve and return interactions, and preventing toxic stress. As kids grow up through their preschool years and even into their teens, a stable, predictable environment will help them develop good executive function skills.
Executive functioning skills can be trained and taught. You do not have to give up on a child who has these problems. There are very sensitive periods during the ages from about 2 to 5 or 6, and again during adolescence, when these skills seem to be kind of growing by leaps and bounds. So you have a couple of opportunities, and ideally do both.
The human brain is an amazing thing. With practice, it can learn to pay attention, plan ahead, prioritize, and react to events as they unfold, just like the air traffic control tower at our busy airport. With help from the community, kids can learn the skills they need to thrive in a challenging world.
So I really like from that video where they talk about how it's okay. There are 2 sensitive periods from 3 to 5 and then through adolescence. So we have many choices to teach that executive function. Okay, so now I just want to go through 2 components of a child's personality. So you know a bit about brains. Let's learn a little bit about temperament. So again, we used to think kids were born into this life with blank slates and how we could mold them from the outside. But we also know, again, there's that interplay between nature and nurture. A lot of children come in this world with a particular temperament, and that's the nature part. So no matter what you do, they are born with a temperament. And it's not anything you do during pregnancy. It's not that chili dog you ate when you were pregnant. It's how they were born. And your job is, after they're here, to support their development and willing to work with their temperament. You can't change their temperament. You can manage it, though. So a child who is born very easygoing will grow into an easygoing toddler, easygoing preschooler, easygoing teenager, easygoing adult. A spirited baby will grow into a spirited toddler, preschooler, teenager, adult. So about 40% of all children are born what we call easygoing. And this is on a continuum. And at the other end, about 15 to 20% of all children born are what we call high need or spirited children. And in the middle is slow to warm up children, about 30%. So it's on a continuum. It's not one way or the other. And here are the 8 temperament traits. So an easygoing child would be very low persistence, low sensitivity, highly adaptable, very low intense, very regular in body functions, very low activity level, positive first reaction, and pretty even-keeled moods. A child who is born spirited temperament would be highly persistent. You said no 20 times and they're still asking you. Very sensitive to light, sounds, textures, smells, too much activity. Not very adaptable. It takes them a long time to settle in and adjust. Highly intense. These are the drama kings and queens. Oh, they put so much energy into their reactions, their moods, their tantrums, anything, their facial expressions. They're so cute. Regularity, not very irregular. They don't sleep train. They don't eat on schedule. They don't poop on schedule. Very high activity level, even for the age. Toddlers are very active, but these are extra active toddlers. Negative first reaction to most things. They don't like change. They don't like surprises. They don't like anything new. And very moody. They're happy one minute, sad the next, screaming the next, oh, back to happy. So those are the temperament traits. So what does that look like in toddlers and preschoolers? They prefer real items over toys. Don't give them a fake cell phone. They want yours. Unpredictable moods. They wake up cranky from most naps and nighttime sleeps. They're poor sleepers. They have a lot of night wakenings. They don't sleep well alone. They have severe separation anxiety. So when you leave them for, it takes them about an hour or two to get over it, where a easygoing child will cry for 5 minutes and then get on to a new task. They're often picky eaters, and this is key. Their frustration tolerance is low. If they don't have something, they will be very intense in their reactions. They need a lot of attention and physical contact. They go through periods of severe resistance to daily routines. They can be clingy in new situations. They insist on self-direction, decisions, and choices. It's like raising a teenager when they're a toddler. That's why the teen years are so easy, because you have learned to adapt so much. Picked your battles pretty early. Not distractible, and very violent, intense temper tantrums that last an hour and a half, whereas an easygoing child will get over a temper tantrum in about 15 minutes. School age, you see a lot of these same things, but now school age children are learning to manage their own temperament with your help. They're very structured and need routines, frequent meltdowns. Even in the school age years, the tantrums don't stop, but they do trickle down. They're determined and persistent. They're picky in their food, sleep, and clothing needs. They still enjoy physical contact, so there are lots of little huggy things. And they become more resilient from practice of managing their coping skills. They're highly creative. They may resist authority. They have to stand up, be the devil's advocate. Often negative reactions. Separation anxiety, yes, even in school age years, and they're becoming very sensitive to other people's feelings, in addition to clothing and lights and sound and people. Teenagers, hey, now you start to get to see the good side. They're determined. That determination and persistence is paying off because they're not easily swayed by peers. They're sensitive to their self and others. They're goal-orientated and self-directed, and they start to become excellent communicators and social skills because they've had practice in advocating for their needs. Advanced ability to solve problems because they have had parents that have problem solved with them, and they're very perceptive about people and situations. So it's good. You see the good side. So what do spirited children need? They need patience, flexibility, pick your battles, problem solving, not punishment, lots of encouragement and understanding, and protection from criticism. Spirited children are unique. They take a unique brand of parenting. I can't say they aren't a challenge, but they do stretch you, and they turn out to be lovely, wonderful people. Okay, in the last bit, well, I want to talk about developmental stages. So young children are pretty normal. They're fast, they're clumsy, they're honest, they're noisy, they're curious, they're cute and cuddly, demanding, messy, joyful, and they're learning sponges, and they don't understand time. And they often go through periods of equilibrium and disequilibrium. So if you're toilet training a child at age 2.5, they're going through a negative stage. You might want to wait until they're 3 and they're a bit more cooperative. This tends to happen on the eve of a new developmental phase where they become a little less cooperative. And kids develop in 4 domains: physical, cognitive, social, and emotional. Children are very egocentric. So from 0 to 5, it's all about them. They don't have that capacity to think and empathize with other people's needs yet. They think of animals and objects as being human. That's what we call animism. They're very black-white thinkers. They may wish things come true. They're starting to get their magical thinking skills. And they have a lack of impulse control. They have a sense of omnipotence, which means they're all-powerful. Nothing bad's going to happen to them. And they have no time sense or ability to plan. Children are unique, absolutely. And they go through these stages of development. The stages closely line with Piaget's cognitive development from 0 to 2, 3 to 6, 6 to 12, and 13 to 25. So let's talk about those. I'm going to go through them in terms of brain development. So 0 to 6 months. If you look at the brain, the stem is developed. This bottom part is developed, much more sensitive. And infants think in terms of sensory input and output. So input is they feel cold. Output is they cry. Infant means input is they're scared, they cry. They're hungry, they cry. They're tired, they cry. Input, output, input, output. And that's what they do. So helpful parenting behaviors here are developing trust and attachment. Trust that a caregiver is going to meet their needs, and attachment. Attachment basically is helping to regulate their stress response. So when infants are scared, they're hungry, they're tired, they're under stress. And when parents come and immediately relieve that stress, they're teaching the infant how to calm down, how to calm their stress. And that's that scaffolding of parenting is they can't do it on their own. We're doing it for them. We're creating that attachment. We're picking them up and holding and comforting them until they're 6, 7, 8 years old and can start to do it themselves. 6 to 18 months. Next stage, the stage of exploration. So this is moving up here, the middle of the brain. They're starting to explore with all their senses. So eat, sleeping, no, seeing, hearing, tasting, touching. That's what they do. They put everything in their mouths, and that's very normal. And I talked about serve and return, definitely. So they need to have security, but they need to explore. They need to discover their world with all 5 senses. And this is a stage that separation anxiety begins because their brain is enabling them to understand that they are a separate person from their caregivers. Up until age 1, babies don't know where they end and mom begins, or dad begins. You're just one big blob. But then they start to realize, ooh, I can be left, and I don't like being left. So separation anxiety kicks in. It peaks in this stage, 18 months to 3 years. Now this is the middle of the brain, the amygdala, the limbic system, the hippocampus. This is where especially sensitive to feelings. So babies have feelings when they're born, but at this age, their feelings are very sensitive. So they feel anger, loneliness, jealousy, frustration, happiness, joy, excuse me, all those wonderful feelings. And they're starting to, excuse me, have tantrums. Tantrums are because they're expressing feelings, but they can't use their words yet. Language development hasn't caught up to their expression. So they express in body language. That means they lie on the floor and scream and and have a tantrum to get those feelings out. Perfectly normal. Absolutely. Let it happen. They start feeling independence, but their capabilities are not so good there too. So they want to tie their shoes, but they can't do it. So they fling the shoe against the wall. Their security. They need security and dependence. So they want you, they don't want you. And again, those feelings, the feelings they can't express in words, they tend to hit, push, and bite. So normal for that age group. They say the word no a lot because they hear it a lot. And like I said, they have very little self-control. So when they do all these things, we say, no, don't do it, but don't expect that they're going to listen. They go through intense separation anxiety, and their attachment is very strong. All these things interplay. They're very honest and active and a short attention span because they have a lot to do. So, ages 0 to 3, don't project. All you're doing is damage control. You're keeping them safe because they don't understand safety rules, and you're keeping your house safe because they don't understand how things can get damaged. You have lots of years to teach when they're school age, lots of years for them to sink in and understand. The problem is parents think, oh, I have to nip it in the bud. I have to address it now, or things are going to snowball and I'm going to have a person who hits at 15. Not true, not true. We have to get the message out to parents that, you know what, you don't have to teach the most important lessons at a time when their brains are not equipped to handle it. They can't handle the frustrations of the limits. So that doesn't mean we don't impose limits. It just means that we can teach them those executive function skills, but don't expect that they're going to get it before age 6. Okay? That is really important. So ages, so when 0to3.org asked parents if they thought a child by age 3 could control their emotions and stop tantrums, 43% of parents thought a child could. And they can't. They can't until age 4 or 5 years. So self-control is the child's capacity to modulate their feelings and then control their behavior. So it involves thinking before they act, understanding consequences, using their words to explain their feelings rather than to push, hit, or bite, manage their feelings, and exhibit the appropriate behavior. They can't do that until age 5 or 6, until they start school, right? And you throw in temperament too. Spirited kids take longer to do those things. And if you throw in the context, if they're tired, they're hungry, they're in a demanding environment, it's even harder for kids to do that. Okay, so remember, planning, memory, reason, decision-making, those all things emerge in adolescence, okay, not with 5-year-olds. So don't forget, parents, that doesn't mean you can't do anything. You can help a child by modeling our executive function, so modeling our self-control. So when our child's out of control, we need to be in control. We can't be losing it ourselves, right? So we discipline, we don't punish, we model, we set limits, we apologize if we do lose control. We teach the child to use their self-talk. We encourage taking a time out for us. We model timeouts for us. We help them through a time in. We can sit with them and say, let's take a quiet moment here and calm down. We encourage them using their words instead of body language. And we prevent a lot of problems by child-proofing. A lot. That's how we can structure our help. So preschoolers are naturally, they question, they whine, they're active, they're discovering their use of power, how they can use their power. The day my son said to me, Mom, you're not coming to my birthday party, I'm so mad at you. He was using his power because he witnessed that other kids use that on other kids. And I'm thinking, yay, one less birthday party to plan. Their imagination part is growing in their brains, and with that is great. You get a lot of cooperative play, magical thinking, you get animism, but you also get a lot of fears too, because that imagination can also power fears. Again, their compliance, if you tell them to do something, 40% of the time, they might do it. 60%, no. Short attention span. Magical thinking here is a little bit like lying. So if your child has eaten a cookie and you know they ate the cookie because they have that chocolate ring around their lips, and you say, did you eat that cookie? And they hope they didn't eat the cookie. So they say, nope, a fairy came in and ate it. They secretly want to magically think that, even though we know. So lying for preschoolers isn't the same as lying for older kids, where they intentionally know they're not telling the truth. So again, limited self-control, no time sense or ability to plan. They rely on you for time. Children don't understand time till about age 7. Again, remember, 60% of children under age 5 do not listen to parents. From birth to 5, it does get better, but wait for it. And this was explained in the marshmallow test in the 60s when they asked a whole room full of 4-year-olds to not eat the marshmallow they were given for 5 minutes, and then they would get a second one. And half the kids couldn't do it, and they were 4. They couldn't have that self-control not to do it. Piaget describes this concept where if you show a 4-year-old a glass of liquid and you pour the liquid in a different shaped glass, a 4-year-old thinks that it's not the same liquid amount. But if you show it to a 7-year-old, they do know. So a 7-year-old has the ability to listen to a no and change their behavior. A 4-year-old, not so much. Now, here are the years you're going to do your best teaching, the school age years, 6 to 12. So their brains, more the back, top of the brains, they're becoming more logical, but they're still concrete and tangible. They can understand things in their environment that they can see, touch, hear, taste. So this is a stage where about 60% of the time children will listen to you. They need to experiment, make mistakes while they're still young, build skills, learn to argue and question, test and negotiate rules. And this is a stage they understand logical consequences. This is the age that they can understand, if I do this, then this might happen, right? That part of executive function. Well, planning, but if I do this, then this will happen. So maybe I'll ask mom instead of dad, because I might get a better answer. So that is a stage of logical, concrete, tangible structure. So here's some characteristics of school agers. Early 6 to 9, they're copycats. They copy everything you do. It's so amazing. They question, they experiment. They're very rule focused. Good time to bring in your family rules. They're sore losers in games, still getting that executive function, still, wrecking the game, board game. They become negotiators, they're concrete learners, and still black and white thinkers. Heading into the tween years, late 10 to 13 school agers, becoming more peer focused, growing out of toys. Well, anything that's not electronic, like blocks and Barbies and those things, Polly Pockets. Getting a little bit more attitude because they're picking up peers. Their worries are starting and they're becoming more self-conscious. They're starting to become more abstract thinkers. So heading into the teen years, the prefrontal cortex is starting to develop now, that front part. So they're starting to think abstract, which means theory, which means things that are not tangible, concrete, but things they can't see, but know are out there. So this is a good time to start learning about death, theories, algebra, those kinds of things, religion. And they're starting to identify who they are. They're starting to experiment with sexuality and separate from the family unit to develop their identity, their own philosophy, values, and beliefs. And this is a stage where about 80% of the time, if you ask them to do something, your relationship's good, they'll do it. So here's some characteristics for early 13 to 15. They're moody, good sleepers. Probably they're moody because they're not getting enough sleep. They're shifting their circadian rhythms. So if they go to bed early, they just can't sleep, but they sleep late in the morning. They can still be impulsive. They're interested in sexuality. Hormones are surging. Abstract learners. They're interested in adult conversations. Very self-conscious. And their risk of peer pressure bullying peaks at this age. Probably because that prefrontal cortex that assures them that, you know what, they can stand up to a bully isn't quite developed yet. Late 16 to 18, now the prefrontal cortex is kicking in. They're becoming more academically serious because their friends are, and they're starting to realize, hey, I got a plan for adulthood. Anxiety, stress, mental health issues may erupt, or they may be noticeable. A lot of mental health issues start 13 to 15. They're searching for their identity. They're solidifying their values, most of which will be yours, but some will be their own. They're becoming more confident, so they're starting to think more about themselves and less about the peer group. And they still have that sense of omnipotence. The key here, too, is in teenagers, the dopamine drivers of the brain, they still want that dopamine hit of pleasure. So whether it's through substances use or doing crazy, risky things, they get that adrenaline hit, but their prefrontal cortex is not developed enough to say, whoa, stop, this is not good in the long run, or this may have complications. So that's why teenagers still need your parenting. And 19 to 100 years, we're still developing, 19 to 25, emerging adults, still developing that prefrontal cortex. But this is where we're really honing our critical thinking, logical thinking, common sense kicks in, and we're starting to reach peak planning decision making. And there you have it. Those are the stages of brain development. So everything is a stage, right? What age can kids bath alone? 7. What age do they stop putting things in their mouths? 4. What age can kids care for a pet without reminding? 12. What age is the most aggressive age of childhood? 2 to 3. What age can kids start chores duties? 18 months. What age do children have feelings? Birth. What age do kids' brains stop developing? 25. What age do most children sleep through the night? 5. What age can kids judge traffic speed and cross a street? 9. What age can kids think manipulatively with logic? Starting around 6. What age do kids play together cooperatively? 3. What age do they understand no? 5. And that's when they understand and hopefully abide by it. Listen to it. What age do most kids stop hitting? 13. Yes. From 0 to 13, hitting peaks around 2.5 and then draws back. It's not, then a little bit around 5, a little bit less around 6, 7, maybe just with siblings around 8, 9, maybe once a year when they're super angry around age 10, but mostly by 13 they should be stopped hitting. Okay, so what do we do? Now keep in mind, a 3-year-old is not the same as a 13-year-old. There's a huge difference, so don't project ahead. What you're seeing now at 3 doesn't mean your 13-year-old's going to still do it. Okay, that's really important. Here's the last section. What do you do with all this information? How to parent. Okay, now parenting has changed, definitely, but in some ways it hasn't. There's tons of information out there, but what we know now about the brains is we get to do MRIs on real human brains and we can see what points light up in response to what we're doing. So we have a better picture of what goes on in child development, where before we had to just use our observational techniques or observe what rats did in a cage, and it's not always what humans did. So we do have really good information now that is research-based. So tell that to Grandma. And because of that technology advancement, we have MRIs. We can actually see what's inside brains. There's a big shift from behavior modification to communication-based techniques. There's an emphasis on mutual respect and problem solving, and there's now no punishment at all in parenting. Remember, good parenting is providing that scaffolding. We're helping children with their life until they can do it themselves. And we pull away bits of scaffold as they get older and more capable. But they still need us. Even your 17-year-old needs you for a little bit of scaffolding just to help them out, right? So parenting, good parenting involves two things, nurturing and structure. If you have too much structure and not enough nurturing, it's like this bike helmet. It's hard and inflexible. And if you have no structure and too much nurturing, it's like this scarf, which has no structure, no form, no presence. So you need to be in the middle and have this little toque, which is flexible but also structure. So what is nurturing? Nurturing is love, comfort, kindness, attention, security, emotional validation, non-sexual touch, listening, encouragement, protection, and never using punishment. Nurturing's a love. Structure is the scaffold. Structure is allowing age-appropriate decisions, natural consequences when they're safe, giving guidance, facilitation, and coaching, teaching, problem solving, setting families' rules and limits together, having routines, having rituals, celebrations, and providing supervision and monitoring, even in the teen years, and reasonable age-appropriate expectations, and modeling responsible citizenship and interpersonal skills. That's what structure. Structure is not punishment. So, so the best place to be is, if I had to choose between authoritarian and permissive, I would say err on the permissive side, because we know that that attachment person helps brain development. Absolutely. Then, don't be authoritarian and don't be uninvolved. Be either authoritative or collaborative. The difference between these two is very slim. Both provide structure and both provide nurturing. Authoritative is more, I'll listen to you, my child, but I make the decision. And collaborative is more, I'll listen to you, my child, and you listen to me, and together we'll come up with a win-win solution. So that's the difference. And both are good. Try to be in the green zone. Keep in mind that you can't be in the green zone all the time. If you're there about 70% of the time, you're doing great. I know there's times you're more authoritarian, like if you have to get them in the car seat, have to get to an appointment, yeah, you're going to be a little more authoritarian and just kind of hold them in that car seat. A lot of times you're going to be more permissive. I remember when I was sick and I would pay my kids to watch movies because I couldn't get up off the couch. That's okay. But most of the time, 70% of the time, be in the green zone. Try not to be here. I'll show you this in movies. King Triton, wow, he was pretty authoritarian. He said it was my way or the highway, so Ariel goes underground, which a lot of kids do when they get older and more capable. Same with Brave, the Disney movie Brave. Merida. She went underground against her mother's wishes because they didn't work out a win-win solution. Permissive, the Frog Princess. Yes, anything her daddy gave her, she wanted. That's not always good either. Same with Nanny McPhee. Little too permissive that dad was. Neglect is the Frozen sisters. Growing up without parents, they didn't look like they had too much nurturing there, and that could be toxic stress without a caregiver there on their side. And the best place to be when Nanny McPhee actually got to the family, that was good. She was a picture of authoritative parenting. And Cheaper by the Dozen is a good example of parents involved, caring, but still setting rules and limits. Good example. So ask yourself if what I'm doing is rarely or regularly. If you're yelling or spanking your kids regularly, kind of look at, is that going to be good? And try and do it a little less regularly. Okay. I just want to talk about mutual respect is to treat others the way you want to be treated. So although parents and children are not equal in terms of needs, feelings, and dignity, they are equal in terms of those. They're not equal in terms of experience and knowledge. So we have a lot more to offer our children, but we do respect them in that our needs and feelings and our dignity is the same. So nowadays, we don't use fear in our parenting relationship. Fear works on punishment. We use knowledge, experience, open communication, and respect. And that's how we can help our children. So best discipline techniques for under age 3 are redirection, child-proofing, substitution, modeling, teaching, but without that expectation, their brains are going to absorb it. After age 4, teach. Use your words. Teach, 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 problem solve. And again, still you can child-proof, you can model. You don't have to punish kids. Teaching is what they need. Now, parents bring different things to the parenting relationship, and that's a good thing. And the best way to get your partner on board is to model, not nag. Model what you do and works. Agree on a few core values. What one parent starts, they finish. So you don't have to control your parent and their parenting partner and their parenting. You parent, they finish what they start, you finish what you start. You don't have to aim for united front. You can aim to support because each parent is developing a relationship with each child. They are in control of that relationship. You can actually not agree with your parenting partner, but support them. So if your child comes to you and says, Dad won't let me go on a sleepover, you can say, well, it doesn't matter to me, but it's important to your dad, so you go talk to him about it and work it out. That's supporting each other. And are you tempted to criticize your partner? Think about it. Is it better that they have a relationship? Is it really dangerous? Will it cause harm? Do you want to be forever responsible? Is it contrary to your core values? Can you model something different? And really, is their relationship more important than if he puts a diaper on backwards? Remember, good enough is okay. We are all great parents. Aim for 70%. And don't forget to find your community because parenting is one big, long process of executive function. We need support. And it's okay to be different. So think of what's your goal today? What are you going to do? And I want to end with this poem, The Parent's Affirmation of Imperfection. It's perfectly okay for me to be imperfect. This includes not being a perfect parent. This means that it's okay I've already made a lot of mistakes as a parent, and it's okay I'm going to make other mistakes in the future. What's not okay is for me to pretend that I'm perfect and thereby hide my mistakes from myself. Instead, I'll catch my mistakes with a smile rather than a kick and learn what they have to teach me. That way, I won't make the same mistakes too often, and I'll never be a perfect parent, and that's okay, because my goal is excellence, not perfection. And that's by Anonymous. Okay, well, thank you for joining us on the webinar, and I hope that if you have any questions, we can open up a question and answer session on private coaching. Feel free to email me and set up a time that's convenient for you, and I would be happy to explore your individual challenges and joys. In the meantime, thank you and have a very good day.